Oh, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good.
Good,
How are
good,
you?
good, man. Good. I think we were joking before the show. It's one of those mornings where I needed to go find my glasses to find my glasses. So, um, like, man. Anyway, yeah. So for this 5 Minute Friday today, just wanted to maybe talk about something about a post that you made actually. But I guess before we get started on that, for the listeners who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Matthew Mullins. I'm the CTO for Cogenity. We're a collaborative data ops platform, and I've been working in tech for a long time, close to 30 years.
Nice.
Took a little hiatus to go do some philosophy and came back. Um, so that's me.
Cool. What's I think interesting about your posts is philosophy is I think kind of front and center in my opinion to a lot of your thinking. Maybe this ties into what we're going to talk about, but um, why are you so damn philosophical, Matt?
I think that like people that are interested in philosophy, there's something that's a little bit wrong with them. Because you look at the world and you see, you just have these questions about things that you want to explain. It's like you're the toddler that never grew out of asking why about things. And the kind of things that bother you, probably don't bother normal people. So,
Which leads us to this post. So I think a couple of days ago, and you said this is a joke, but you said you're thinking of starting a new podcast, just old data people with episodes like you could have just used SQL for that. HTAP is Data Fusion's technology. Self-service is learning SQL. Whatever it is, IBM probably did it 20 years ago. We kept score. Kimball won. Dashboards are always a bad idea. It's all just regression. And finally, you could just use Postgres. So I think these are all great topics. You have lucky enough to have another cranky old man talking to you. So yeah, let's riff on a few of these. Pick one.
HTAP is data's, fusion technology.
Okay. And what does HTAP stand for?
This is a hybrid transactional processing. So, I mean, since the 80s, we've separated, our transactional systems from our analytical systems, right? We're not going to run those two together. And, this has always given us all kinds of challenges around data movement and things like that. And we've evolved like really distinct systems. And so there's been this drive to bring the two back together, right? Can we have our transactional system and our analytical system, run side by side? And, there's a number of vendors. I saw a thing in the news, the other day that someone, they finally got it on their third try. And of course, I'm like, did they really though?
Who's they? Is it a vendor or was it a
Yeah, it was a vendor. It was a
customer?
vendor.
Okay.
So, claiming like, oh, it took us three tries. And I know that, Snowflake's been working on this so you can run your, transactional systems on your analytic system. And
I
I'm,
think mem
still not quite there yet. And,
Yeah.
it's always this thing of like, well, it's just around the corner. Um, and it's been around the corner for a long time.
Yeah, like who was it? I think MemSQL, which later became Single Store, was one of the early companies doing that too.
Yeah, single store was in the
HTAP,
news the other day it took us three tries.
to get to the cloud, I think it was for the cloud. Yeah, yeah, it's a hard problem.
Yeah,
Most of the
yeah.
people that work there, yeah, it's an insanely difficult problem. Um,
So is
and
Fusion.
what Fusion, virtual reality adoption is also
Yeah,
hard.
yeah.
That's always been around the corner. Fusion's been around the corner. Yeah, that's interesting. Um, do you have any qualms about HTAP as a concept?
I mean, conceptually, it sounds amazing, right? If we could run those two together without, the classic problem is that your analytical processes interfere with your transactional processes, right? And you want, super low latency, ACID, transactions. And, we don't want to run that along with our analysis at the same time. If you can have, your cake and eat it too, amazing, amazing.
Yeah, yeah,
I
it's
mean, so in
interesting.
theory, like in theory, it would be great. It's just actually like, delivering on that is, I think, the real challenge. And, I don't, at this point, it's like, if someone says that they've got it, I'll let someone else go first to try it. Um,
Well, sure, and I think because there's a supply and demand problem too, where I think there's increasingly more quote supply of HTAP, at least on paper or in private release. But what's the demand for it? So I think one thing I always struggle with is even if every database say theoretically offered HTAP, would adoption be there? I.e., would people even know what to do with it?
yeah. And the other challenge is that like all of my data, all of my transactional data doesn't live in the same place, right? So,
Correct.
if you're any kind of enterprise, you've got multiple databases, right? You're gonna want to bring that data together for analysis. So you're really not, avoiding in the long run, being able to move that data somewhere where you can do that analysis.
Good point. Okay, so that's fusion, cold fusion. That's seems like it's still a ways off. I do agree. What was it? The Snowflake announced it was a bit ago. Unistore, I think it was, or
Yeah.
it was a couple of years ago. It was at Snowflake Summit.
They announced it, and then it was a long time before I think it actually, started to come out. And I think it's still, very, very early. This
That's
post
good.
was
That's
kind
great.
of, I think what this post was is I'm going to turn 50 in September,
Congratulations
and I'm, and thanks.
and
And,
condolences.
and so I find that like the closer that I get to turning 50, the more kind of like get off my lawn reactions I'm having. Um, I'm trying to like moderate some of them down. But that's what this was and when you've been around, like you've seen a lot of these things
Yeah,
over time, like the dream of like self-service, right? And we this has always been like every enterprise's dream is to have self-service analytics. Like we want to allow all of our executives to be able to go do their own analysis and to go ask their own questions. And uh, you know we get these like sprawl of dashboards, which leads to this other where dashboards ever really a good idea. Um, so yeah, so just having seen this, for it would have been easier probably to teach everyone in the organization to like be able to write SQL, than to keep introducing these
right.
new tools and new tools that introduce like their own problems, right? I was really happy to see that the guys at Hashboard introduced this feature to automatically self-destruct dashboards, which I call it the Mission Impossible feature, right? Like you want to send the dashboard to someone and say, if you don't read this in the next 2 weeks, it's going to automatically delete itself.
Oh, that's
Um,
pretty cool.
yeah. Yeah.
I like that idea. That's awesome. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I think it's definitely if we kind of take a step back at the context like you're describing here, uh, are these sort of is this coming from a place of I guess frustration like, or what's the driving force behind
I
some of
mean, a
these
little bit
thoughts?
of it is, I think that, I said something the other day, which is that, I feel like tech and data in particular, like we're very ahistorical, right? I mean,
Mm,
we have a lot of young people in the profession who don't necessarily understand, you know, how we got to where we are today. And
yeah,
so they learn how to do things, but they don't necessarily learn like why they are the way they are, right? I remember reading an article last year, someone wrote about OLAP cubes, and they thought that just the very term OLAP cube was gatekeeping, right? Which I guess I could see 30 years later, if you never, were introduced into the realm of OLAP and things like that, it's a new word for you, right? But it's always been OLAP cubes. Like what, I don't know what else you would call it. You could just call them
hmm,
cubes. OLAP, I don't really talk about that much anymore. Um, but
right.
it's just part of
That's
that,
really
that
interesting.
history.
Yeah, yeah. The history argument is a really fascinating one. I've been obviously doing a lot of work on history on my own book right now. This is actually proving the hardest chapter to write by a long shot. It's more of what do you can cover all the history you want, but then that's probably several volumes of books in itself. How do you condense things down to the historical artifacts of what people need to understand in order to get the context of the tools and the technologies and the approaches that they operate within, right? But if you don't understand that, right, then you don't actually understand I think in the fullest way possible how to apply the techniques and the approaches. So
I
OLAP,
think
for
that's exactly
example,
right. Yeah.
it's I think this is empirically correct because if you look at practitioners, especially modern ones or newer ones, like you pointed out, I've seen exactly the same thing. Yeah, you talk about historical figures, you talk about historical ideas. I would say for historical ideas, just like practices or data modeling, for example, right? I think in a lot of cases, people feel like data modeling is literally writing DBT models, like literally the model file.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a version of data
It was,
modeling. I can't
I
say it's
oftentimes feel like it was an inopportune thing to name those models, right? The model is the whole, right? And if you think about like the history of that, and you're writing at a really opportune time because you think that like, these guys like Kimball and like Inman, I mean, they're about 80 now. So
yeah,
all the people that I learned that from are now, most of them are retired. I mean, most of them are, in their 60s and 70s now. And that's, where that kind of heritage of knowledge comes from. I think the Kimball book was last updated in like the middle 90s. Um, but you understand like the reasons like why some of those design choices were made, but also like what are the parts of it that like we still want to keep today, right? I still think that like
right.
the star schema is good for reasoning about data, right? It makes
Really
it
good.
easier to be able to like conceptually think about data, versus like one big table, right? One big table might be performant. Is it easier for people to work with? Is it easier for your tools to work with? We don't have the same constraints that those people had 20, 30 years ago in terms of like processing and compute. But there's still reasons why those models are good.
I could definitely make an argument that the data back then that was more properly modeled was actually better in some ways too, and so because it was probably more well reasoned about.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Kimball star schema, but then there's also the relational model, right? Which is I think still stands as probably the strictest, but probably the best data model if you're working with tabular data, just to reason about the data and make sure you've logically constructed a model where there's no dependencies and no side effects. That's
So someone asked me this question
mathematically
the other
true.
day about like visual modeling tools. Like, well, how do you feel about like visual modeling tools? And I said, the problem is that a lot of times when people work with visual tools, is they don't understand like there's a certain kind of like physics and gravity to working with data, right? And if you learn that, I think coming, like we start from a code first perspective, and when you come from it from that side, I think you learn to reason about the data differently than if you do just using visual based tools, right? And if you
Yep.
just use those visual based tools, then you're the tool's making a lot of choices underneath the covers that you're not going to be aware of that may not be performant. And so I think that like the relational model is a great example of that. Like if you don't fundamentally understand the relational model, then in a visual tool you can do a lot of bad things.
A lot of bad things. And you couple that, especially on the software engineering end, not even talking about analytics, but the use of ORMs or object relational mappers. Again, if you don't understand the relational model, I've seen absolute horror shows. I mean, I've probably done a few of these things myself during sprints, shipping out of features like let's add a new field to the model file, in this case, the MVC, model view
Yeah.
controller paradigm, if you're in Rails or Django. But yeah, and that's that easy. But now you have new fields in your database, then nothing's well reasoned about. But hey, I got to get my feature out. So there you go. And pretty soon, your database has got a ton of duplications.
I'm always
All
stunned
sorts
to
of
learn
mess.
that there are software engineers that don't know SQL. Um,
There's a lot.
yeah. I mean, because we build data tools, like it's like a requirement coming in the door. So everyone that I work with knows SQL, knows it deep, knows databases, and so when I meet these other people, I'm like, oh, that's so weird. How do you build anything? And
Yeah.
certainly anything that's going to scale, is where it's going to get you in real trouble. So.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So that's an interesting point. And then let me see some other stuff you wrote. IBM probably did it first 20 years ago. You want to talk about that?
If it wasn't IBM, it was Microsoft. So there's so many things that like we discover that people tried it before, or they actually did it this has been around for a long time. Like I always think about like people think that like ELT is a came out of cloud data warehousing. We were doing ELT, long time before that. We are doing it on the IBM Netezza for years before that moved to the cloud.
Mm.
I was talking to uh, I was talking to this guy Bill Baker, who Bill Baker helped build SSRS and SSIS at
Yep.
Microsoft, and we were talking about the composable data stack, and he said that's what we were trying to do with OLEDB, 20 years ago.
Mm.
And the problem was is that we didn't open source it, even though they wanted to, and so it's too tied to Microsoft. And I think that that was an interesting insight, but also like learning from like what was the thing that they didn't do that really held that back, which was making that more open. Um,
Right. Which in Microsoft 20 years ago, that wasn't the Microsoft of today, by the way. It was
yeah,
a
yeah,
different
right,
place. Like I think they're had a violent war against Linux, for example.
right. But they're learning
It's
that by being open, they've gotten a lot more traction, and you
a
need that
ton.
openness to drive that kind of adoption.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I think they're actually my favorite big cloud vendor at this moment. Just I think for whatever reasons. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I had a talk yesterday at my practical data modeling. We had the semantic layer smackdown, and we were trying to figure out like what the hell is a semantic layer. But we also brought up that Business Objects patented the idea of a semantic layer back in 1992.
right.
They've been using it all along. So this isn't a new thing. I mean, that's a full grown adult with children at this point. So
Yeah, yeah. The I think the semantic layer, at least conceptually, has been around for a long time, and it'll be interesting to see like what the adoption curve looks like for these kind of like universal semantic layers when you decoupled them from the tools.
yep. Let's pick another final one here. Go ahead and pick one, actually.
How about dashboards are always a bad idea?
Okay, this is controversial.
And yet, I there's a lot. Even ThoughtSpot will say like, they run the dashboards are dead, um, and I know people that have uh, Bill Baker's a good example. He built SSRS. He can't stand BI today, and
Oh, wow.
yeah, yeah, just thinks it's like a huge mistake. And there's so many, but there's new ones that are born every year. And for all of the challenges that we've seen with dashboarding, people keep trying to reinvent the mousetrap. And yet, Power BI's 25% of the market. Tableau is probably another 15%. It's really dominated by, two or three players. But there's all these issues of like, you know, how do you find any, you get this dashboard sprawl the same way you get like when people don't, keep their database, well modeled and clean, like what are the things that are out of date? And I think it just gets worse as you go further downstream. Um,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and
But
I
fair
do like
bash.
what we're seeing like the emergence of more lightweight tools for
Uh-huh.
this. So you think of like a lot of the things that like you see in notebooks, and when I talk to customers, a lot of times what they're doing is they're just looking to create a visualization that they're going to go put in PowerPoint anyways. And so when you have these tools that can still create the visualization, without persisting it out there at the dashboard, then they're able to do that. And so we see, kind of a lot of the, embedded or copy the chart out for someone's report.
Mm, makes sense. Yeah, I guess we'll see. It seems like dashboards just continue to proliferate. I don't know what they're used for. Sometimes people look at them, so I don't know. Sometimes people don't. What I find interesting is that you're talking about dashboards, and there's also the rise of being able to chat with your data with an AI bot now, a chat bot. And so I'm curious because I think a lot of these dashboards already have the answers that you'd be asking the chat bot. And so the big mental dichotomy I'm working with right now is people don't really tend to look at dashboards. I know I've heard from many people that dashboard usage it just drops off a cliff after the first bit.
Right.
And so, but if most of the answers are there, I guess the important ones, I guess that would be why you would make a dashboard just to answer important questions. And it makes me wonder what the adoption is and usage of these large language models is going to be, because I think the argument's like you can chat with your data in all these ways. I'm like, people don't even look at it right now. What do you think is this going to like force them all of a sudden to be interested in their data? I don't know.
Yeah, I
Kind
mean,
of skeptical.
I feel like stakeholders like frequently have like a one-time question, right?
Yep.
I have a question that I need an answer to, and it's kind of bespoke. And someone creates a dashboard for that. I didn't really need a dashboard. I just needed an answer.
Yeah.
And the question is, can the model give that answer? And that goes back to this question, like, is that baked into this, into the semantic layer, to be able to go do that? And do you trust, the model? Do you trust the language model more than you trust your analyst?
And the
Uh,
data model.
right, right.
Yeah.
And I think that, it goes back. The data, I see these semantic layers. I'm like, look, you can't build a good semantic layer without a data model. The data model's got to come
Right.
first. Not enough people talking about it.
Yep.
And we've been saying it for, over a decade now. Like, in order to do ML and AI, like, you need clean, well modeled, quality data. I think that, finally people are catching up to that idea. Now that we have these language models, and now that they want to kind of unleash them. Um, so
Yeah. It's like I feel like we're basically in the 1990s, and we're like that niche kind of health food store. This is before organic and everything got
yeah,
popular, right? But then all of a sudden, over the decades, what was niche and fringe becomes mainstream, right? Now
we're
everyone's
going to
like
blow up
adopting.
into Whole Foods. We're going to blow up into Whole Foods, and Amazon's going to
Yeah,
come and buy us.
exactly. So I mean, that kind of feels like that's where all these conversations are, like data modeling. I was writing about this morning for my book on data modeling, but it was like the just this pendulum of going back and forth. But it seems like we definitely ignored a lot of practices for a while, just because I think the assumption was you could just throw technology at things and be done with it, and you
Yeah.
can certainly get away with that, but it doesn't it doesn't get away from the problems. It just hides them.
We
So,
took a decades long off ramp into Hadoop, um,
yep.
which probably set the industry as a whole back by a decade. And there's a huge gap. I mean, I talk about people that know modeling, and there's a definite age gap in the people that I know that are in their 60s and 70s. And then there's a very small pool of people. And there's a lot. The good thing is there's a lot of young people that want to know.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. So maybe through podcasts, that the one you plan to do, be able to educate them on, um, it'll be sort of like a Bob Vila show or something. I don't know, but
This
yeah,
old
it should be
data.
good. What's
We'll,
up?
we'll call it this old data, just
This
like
old data.
yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to be a guest on your podcast anytime. I think it'd be a fun one. If you ever need any help or anything, just getting off the ground, let me know. Happy to
I appreciate
help
that.
you
That might be the
check it
one
out.
reason
Yeah.
to do it. Is all these people that reached out and said, "I would love to come on the show and talk about this." Um,
Careful about the stuff you post. I mean, you got like at this point 165 reactions and 33 comments. I think that's pretty good. Proof you need to go and do this. So,
I got to be careful with my jokes. So
yeah, exactly. Well, at least you didn't promise to write a book or anything, like I did. So,
got to be careful about that.
awesome, man. Cool. Well, yeah, good talking to you, and I guess keep up the good fight. Yeah.
It was
So
good
thanks
chatting,
for
Joe.
yeah, likewise. Yeah. Talk to you later.
Be
Bye bye.
well.